In the gilded ballroom of the Metropolitan Hotel in downtown Chicago, a successful tech entrepreneur was about to discover that family hierarchies die hard, even when you're the one paying for half the wedding. What started as a celebration of love turned into a masterclass in disrespect when Lourdes Ford found herself relegated to the children's table at her own brother's reception. But sometimes the most humiliating moments become the catalyst for the most spectacular comebacks. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Chicago skyline stretched endlessly beyond the airplane window, its steel and glass towers catching the late afternoon sun like scattered diamonds. Lourdes Ford pressed her forehead against the cool plastic, watching the city she'd conquered in the tech world grow larger as her flight descended into O'Hare. 5 years since she'd been back to the Windy City. 5 years since she'd last subjected herself to the particular brand of family dysfunction that seemed to thrive in the Ford household. Her phone buzzed with yet another message from her mother, Patricia Ford, each text more frantic than the last. "The rehearsal dinner is at 7. Don't be late. Your brother is so excited to see you." The exclamation points felt aggressive, like verbal confetti being thrown to mask underlying tensions. Lourdes knew better. Marcus wasn't excited to see her. He was excited to show her off when it served his purposes and minimize her when it didn't. The flight attendant's voice crackled through the speakers, announcing their final descent into Chicago. Lourdes closed her laptop, where she'd been reviewing quarterly reports for her AI startup, Neural Dynamics. The numbers were impressive: $30 million in revenue this year, with projections to double that next year. Not bad for a girl who'd grown up in Garfield Park, where success was measured by making it through high school without getting pregnant or arrested. She'd built something real, something that mattered. Her company's AI platform was revolutionizing healthcare diagnostics, helping doctors in rural areas access the same quality of analysis as major medical centers. 3 months ago, she'd been featured on the cover of Forbes as one of 30 under 30 tech visionaries changing the world. The article had called her the brilliant mind behind the democratization of medical AI. Her family's reaction to the Forbes cover had been predictable. Her mother had posted it on Facebook with the caption, "So proud of my baby girl," as if Lourdes were still 12 years old winning a spelling bee. Marcus had texted a brief "congrats," followed immediately by a request to keep things low-key at the wedding. "We don't want to overshadow the bride." Because heaven forbid anyone acknowledge that the black sheep of the Ford family had actually accomplished something significant. The truth was, Lourdes had funded nearly half of Marcus's wedding to Stephanie Whitmore. When her brother had called 6 months ago, his voice tight with the particular stress that came with planning a wedding beyond your means, she'd written a check for $50,000 without hesitation. "Just make it special for Stephanie," she'd said, remembering how her future sister-in-law had always been kind to her during their brief interactions. "She deserves a beautiful day." Marcus had accepted the money with gratitude that felt genuine, promising that Lourdes would be honored appropriately at the wedding. "You're not just my sister," he'd said during that phone call. "You're family, and family takes care of family." Those words had meant something to her, had made her believe that maybe, finally, her success would translate into respect from the people who'd known her longest. The taxi ride from O'Hare to her childhood neighborhood took her through a city transformed by gentrification and economic growth, but also stubbornly unchanged in the ways that mattered. The same corner stores, the same bus stops where she'd waited as a teenager dreaming of something bigger. The same feeling of not quite belonging that had driven her to work 18-hour days in Silicon Valley, proving herself in boardrooms where she was often the only black woman, the only person under 30, the only one who hadn't inherited their opportunities. Her parents' house on Kedzie Avenue looked smaller than she remembered, the brick facade weathered but maintained with the careful pride of people who understood that appearances mattered, in a neighborhood where judgment came quick and forgiveness came slow. The front garden still bloomed with her mother's prized roses, late October flowers that spoke to Patricia's determination to maintain beauty even as the season turned harsh. Patricia Ford emerged from the front door before Lourdes could even pay the taxi driver, her arms already open in the performance of maternal joy she'd perfected over the years. At 62, her mother had grown softer around the edges but maintained the sharp eyes that had kept 5 children in line during leaner years. "Lourdes, baby!" Patricia's embrace smelled like the vanilla perfume she'd worn for as long as Lourdes could remember, mixed with the lingering scent of whatever elaborate meal she'd been preparing for tonight's family gathering. "Look at you, all professional in that beautiful suit. You look like you stepped out of a magazine." The compliment carried the particular weight of a mother who was proud, but also somehow surprised by her daughter's success, as if Lourdes' achievements were wonderful, but also slightly improbable. "Hi, Mom," Lourdes said, allowing herself to sink into the familiar comfort of being someone's daughter, even if only temporarily. Inside, the house felt like a museum of her childhood. Same burgundy carpet, same family photographs arranged with careful precision on the mantelpiece, same feeling of being both home and somehow out of place. Her high school graduation photo sat prominently displayed, but she noticed her Forbes cover had been relegated to a side table, partially obscured by a more recent photo of Marcus at some work event. "Your father's at the shop," Patricia said, bustling toward the kitchen with the nervous energy that always accompanied family gatherings. "You know how he gets when Marcus needs help with anything. Drops everything to make sure his boy has what he needs." The casual favoritism in her mother's words stung, but not with the sharp pain it once had. Success had given Lourdes perspective, if not complete immunity. The kitchen smelled like her childhood. Garlic and onions, something rich simmering on the stove that spoke to hours of careful preparation. This was Patricia's love language, elaborate meals that demonstrated care even when words failed her. "I'm making your favorite," her mother continued, lifting the lid of a large pot to reveal oxtail stew. "Remember how you used to beg me to make this when you were little?" Lourdes remembered being 8 years old, standing on a step stool beside this same stove, watching her mother work magic with simple ingredients. She remembered believing that if she could just be good enough, helpful enough, successful enough, she'd earn the uncomplicated love that seemed to flow so naturally toward Marcus and her other siblings. "Tell me about this wedding," Lourdes said, accepting the glass of sweet tea her mother pressed into her hands. "Stephanie seems lovely from what I've seen on social media." Patricia's face lit up with the particular joy that came when discussing her children's romantic happiness. "Oh, she's perfect for Marcus." Her family owns 3 car dealerships across the South Side. Very established, very respectable. The Whitmores have been in Chicago for generations. Real Chicago family. You know what I mean. Lourdes knew exactly what she meant. Real Chicago family meant roots, meant connections, meant the kind of social capital that came with staying in one place long enough to build relationships that mattered. It meant everything Lourdes had given up when she'd chased her dreams to California, trading family proximity for professional opportunity. "The reception is going to be beautiful," Patricia continued, her voice taking on the breathless quality that came with managing complex social dynamics. The Whitmores spared no expense. "Well, I suppose you helped with that too, didn't you, baby?" The acknowledgement felt grudging, as if her financial contribution was somehow less valuable because it came from a daughter rather than a son. "I was happy to help," Lourdes said carefully. "I want Marcus and Stephanie to have a perfect day." "That's so sweet of you, honey. The Whitmores have been so generous with including all of us. You know how these established families can be. They have their ways, their traditions, but they've been very welcoming." Patricia's emphasis on welcoming felt loaded, as if the Whitmores' acceptance was a gift rather than a basic courtesy. Before Lourdes could respond, the front door opened with the familiar bang that announced Marcus's arrival. Her brother appeared in the kitchen doorway, 32 years old, and carrying himself with the easy confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. His embrace was brief but warm, the hug of siblings who loved each other despite years of complicated dynamics. "There's my successful sister," Marcus said, stepping back to study her face. "You look good, Lou. California's treating you well." "It is," she replied, noting how he managed to acknowledge her success, while somehow making it sound like a phase she was going through rather than the life she'd built. "Congratulations on the wedding. I'm excited to meet Stephanie's family." They're good people, Marcus said, accepting the beer their mother handed him. Traditional, you know? They appreciate family values, respect for elders, that kind of thing. His words felt carefully chosen, as if he were preparing her for something. The wedding's going to be pretty formal. Stephanie's grandmother is 93 and has very specific ideas about how things should be done. Lourdes nodded, recognizing the careful phrasing that usually preceded requests for her to modify her behavior, tone down her opinions, or somehow make herself smaller to accommodate other people's comfort. She'd heard variations of this speech her entire life, from teachers who thought she was too assertive, to colleagues who found her intimidating, to family members who worried she was getting too big for her britches. "I'm sure it'll be beautiful," she said evenly. "I'm looking forward to celebrating with everyone." The conversation continued over dinner, flowing through safe topics like Marcus's job at the municipal water department, Patricia's work at the local community center, and carefully neutral questions about Lourdes's life in San Francisco. No one asked about the specifics of her business, the recent funding round that had valued her company at over $100 million, or the keynote speech she'd given at the National Healthcare Innovation Conference just last month. They treated her success like an interesting hobby, rather than a career that was changing lives and generating wealth. It was easier, she supposed, than acknowledging that the youngest Ford child had somehow managed to build something that dwarfed anything the rest of the family had achieved. As the evening wore on, Lourdes found herself remembering why she'd needed to leave Chicago in the first place. Not because she didn't love her family, but because their love came with conditions, expectations, and subtle requirements to remain small enough not to threaten the established order. Tomorrow would bring the wedding, and with it, the complex choreography of family dynamics she'd hoped her success might have changed. But sitting in her childhood kitchen, listening to her mother worry about whether she'd packed appropriate shoes and her brother's stress about timeline logistics, Lourdes realized that some things never changed. Success might have given her financial independence, but it hadn't altered her family's perception of who she was supposed to be among them. The question was whether she was still willing to play that role. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The next morning arrived with the crisp bite of late October in Chicago, the kind of weather that made the city feel alive with possibility. Lourdes woke in her childhood bedroom, now converted into her mother's craft room, but still holding echoes of the teenager she'd once been. Fabric samples and sewing patterns covered the desk where she'd once studied for SATs, dreaming of colleges far from Kedzie Avenue. Her phone showed 3 missed calls from her assistant, Jasmine, back in San Francisco. The first was about a potential partnership with Johns Hopkins Medical Center, the second about a scheduling conflict with next week's board meeting, and the third was Jasmine's excited voice, reporting that TechCrunch wanted to do a feature story about Neural Dynamics' latest breakthrough in predictive diagnostics. "Lourdes, girl, you need to call me back. They want to interview you next Friday about the algorithm that's predicting heart attacks 3 hours before symptoms appear. This is huge." Jasmine's enthusiasm made Lourdes smile. Her assistant understood the magnitude of what they were building, the lives they were saving with code that could see patterns human doctors missed. But here in Chicago, in her mother's house that smelled like coffee and the lingering vanilla of last night's pound cake, that world felt distant. Here, she was just Lou, Marcus's little sister, who'd gotten lucky in California and needed to remember not to get too full of herself. Downstairs, Patricia was already in full wedding preparation mode, coordinating with caterers via phone while simultaneously ironing Marcus's rehearsal dinner shirt. The controlled chaos of maternal management filled the kitchen with familiar energy. "Morning, baby," Patricia called out without looking up from the ironing board. "Coffee's fresh. Your father already left to help Marcus with some last-minute tuxedo emergency. You know how men are with formal wear." Lourdes poured coffee into a mug that read "World's Greatest Mom" and settled at the kitchen table where she'd eaten countless bowls of cereal before school. Through the window, she could see Mrs. Rodriguez next door tending to her garden, the same woman who'd given Lourdes her first job babysitting when she was 14. "Tell me about Stephanie's family," Lourdes said, sensing there were dynamics she needed to understand before tonight's rehearsal dinner. "You mentioned they're established." Patricia's face brightened, but something flickered beneath her smile. "Oh, they're lovely people, been in Chicago since the 1920s. Stephanie's grandfather started with one used car lot and built it into an empire. Her father, Robert Whitmore, he's very successful, traditional businessman, values hard work and family legacy. The way her mother said, quote, traditional businessman carried weight, like a code that Lourdes was supposed to understand. In her experience, when older black folks described white people as, quote, traditional, it usually meant they held particular views about social hierarchies that hadn't evolved much since their grandparents' generation. "And they're comfortable with Marcus marrying into our family?" Lourdes asked, testing the waters. "Well, of course they are," Patricia replied quickly, her voice taking on the defensive edge that came when she felt questioned. "Marcus is a good man with a steady job. He's respectable. The Whitmores can see that he comes from good people who raised him right." The emphasis on, quote, respectable and, quote, raised him right felt pointed, as if Patricia was reassuring herself as much as informing Lourdes. In the complex mathematics of interracial relationships, especially those that crossed economic lines, respectability became currency. Marcus's municipal job, his steady presence in Chicago, his conventional path through life, these things made him safe, acceptable, non-threatening. By contrast, Lourdes' success felt more complicated to navigate. Building a tech company from nothing was impressive, but it also marked her as someone who'd rejected traditional paths, who'd bet on herself instead of seeking approval from established institutions. That kind of independence made some people uncomfortable, especially those who preferred their success to come with proper credentials and appropriate humility. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Patricia answered with the bright voice she reserved for important calls. "Hello, Mrs. Whitmore. Yes, everything is going beautifully." "Oh, absolutely. We're so excited for tonight." "Lourdes?" "Yes, she flew in yesterday from San Francisco. She's in business out there, very successful." "Oh, you saw the article? How wonderful. Yes, of course, we'll see you at 7. When she hung up, Patricia's smile looked strained. "That was Stephanie's mother, Catherine. She mentioned seeing your Forbes article online, said she's looking forward to meeting you tonight." Something in her mother's tone suggested that Catherine Whitmore's interest in meeting her wasn't entirely positive. Lourdes had learned to read these subtle social cues during her years in Silicon Valley, where enthusiasm could mask competitive assessment and curiosity often disguised concern. "That's nice," Lourdes said carefully. "What else did she say?" "Oh, just, you know how it is. Some people aren't sure what to expect when they hear tech entrepreneur. She probably thinks you're some kind of, I don't know, Mark Zuckerberg type." Patricia laughed, but it sounded forced. "I told her, you're just our Lourdes. Same sweet girl you've always been." The phrase, just our Lourdes, stung more than her mother probably intended. It reduced everything she'd built, every 18-hour day she'd worked, every investor meeting she'd conquered, every life her technology had saved, down to being the same girl who'd grown up in this house. As if success were something that happened to her, rather than something she'd created through intelligence, determination, and relentless work. The afternoon passed in a blur of wedding preparation activities. Lourdes found herself assigned to help with centerpiece arrangements, a task that kept her busy but peripheral to the real decision-making happening around her. She arranged white roses and baby's breath while listening to conversations about seating charts, timeline logistics, and the particular preferences of various Whitmore family members. "Make sure Uncle Harold sits near the front," she heard Stephanie say during a phone call with the wedding planner. "He's 90 and nearly deaf, but he's paying for the honeymoon, so he gets VIP treatment. And keep Aunt Carol away from the bar. She gets handsy with the waiters when she's been drinking." Family dynamics played out in real time as relatives arrived for the rehearsal dinner. Lourdes watched Marcus navigate between his world and Stephanie's, his posture subtly changing depending on which group he was addressing. With his own family, he was relaxed, joking, comfortable. With the Whitmores, he stood straighter, spoke more formally, performed a version of himself that emphasized his reliability and conventional respectability. When they arrived at Palmer House Hotel for the rehearsal dinner, Lourdes felt the weight of entering a space designed to intimidate. The ballroom's crystal chandeliers and gold leaf details spoke to the kind of generational wealth that treated luxury as background noise rather than special occasion. This was the Whitmores' natural habitat, and everyone else was visiting. Robert Whitmore commanded attention without trying, tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His handshake was firm but brief, his assessment of Lourdes quick and calculating. "So you're the famous entrepreneur," he said, his tone carrying the particular skepticism that successful men reserved for young women who claimed similar success. "Catherine mentioned reading about your company. Artificial intelligence, is it?" The pause before quote, deliberate, as if he were questioning whether her business was real or some kind of elaborate hobby. "Neural dynamics," Lourdes confirmed, maintaining eye contact. "We develop AI diagnostic tools for healthcare applications. Our platform helps doctors identify patterns in patient data that human analysis might miss." "How interesting," Catherine Whitmore interjected, appearing beside her husband with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was elegant in the way that came with professional styling and generational confidence, her blonde hair perfectly arranged despite the October wind. "And you built this yourself? How impressive for someone so young." The word impressive carried quotation marks, spoken with the tone people used when they wanted to acknowledge an achievement while simultaneously minimizing it. Lourdes recognized the technique. She'd encountered it in every boardroom where she'd been the youngest person, the only woman, or the only black face. "I had an incredible team," Lourdes replied graciously, refusing to take the bait. "Success in tech is always collaborative." "Of course," Robert said, his attention already shifting toward Marcus with visible relief. "And you, Marcus? How's the water department treating you? Still working on that infrastructure project?" The conversation flowed naturally when focused on Marcus. His steady job, his reliable presence in Chicago, his conventional path through life. These were accomplishments the Whitmores could understand and value. Steady employment, local roots, predictable trajectory. Lourdes' success was too abstract, too unconventional, too threatening to their understanding of how success should look and who should achieve it. During dinner, she found herself seated between Marcus's college friend Derek and Stephanie's teenage cousin Ashley, who spent most of the meal texting and asking if Lourdes knew any famous people from California. The placement felt strategic, close enough to family to avoid obvious slight, far enough from the center of power to minimize her influence on important conversations. She watched Robert Whitmore hold court at the head table, telling stories about the early days of his business that emphasized his vision, his risk-taking, his brilliant decisions that had built an empire from nothing. The irony wasn't lost on her. He was describing exactly the kind of entrepreneurial journey she'd taken, but when he did it, it was inspirational. When she did it, it was suspect. Ozara. As the evening wound down, Lourdes found herself wondering what tomorrow would bring. Tonight had been carefully choreographed to maintain social harmony, but she'd felt the undercurrents of judgment and skepticism that her success generated among the Whitmores. Tomorrow's wedding would be their show, their rules, their definitions of who mattered and who didn't. She had no idea that by tomorrow night those definitions would be turned completely upside down. Lourdes woke to her phone vibrating insistently against the nightstand. The display showed 5:47 a.m. and an incoming call from Dr. Amanda Chen, the lead researcher at Stanford Medical Center, who'd been beta testing Neural Dynamics' latest cardiac prediction algorithm. "Lourdes, I'm sorry to call so early, but I had to tell you, we just saved a life using your platform." Amanda's voice carried the exhausted excitement of someone who'd been up all night in an emergency room. 62-year-old construction worker came in with what he thought was indigestion. "Your AI flagged a 94% probability of cardiac event within 2 hours. We ran additional tests, found a massive blockage, and got him into surgery. The cardiologist said without that early warning he would have died at home tonight." The news hit Lourdes like caffeine straight to the bloodstream. This was why she'd left Chicago, why she'd worked 20-hour days for 3 years, why she'd mortgaged everything to build something that mattered. While she was here worrying about family politics and wedding seating arrangements, her technology was literally saving lives on the other side of the country. "That's incredible, Amanda. How's the patient doing?" "Stable. Recovery looks good. But here's the thing. The ER attending wants to know if we can fast-track implementation hospital-wide. They're saying this could revolutionize emergency cardiac care." Amanda paused, Lourdes, I think you're looking at a Nobel Prize pathway here. This technology is going to change everything. After they hung up, Lourdes sat in the pre-dawn darkness of her childhood bedroom, processing the magnitude of what was happening. Her algorithm had just prevented a man's death. His children would have their father at Christmas. His wife wouldn't become a widow. All because of code she'd written, patterns she'd taught a computer to recognize, innovations that had emerged from her mind, and her determination to solve problems that others had accepted as unsolvable. But in 6 hours, she'd be sitting at Marcus's wedding, where her primary value would be measured by how quietly she celebrated his happiness and how little attention she drew to her own accomplishments. The dichotomy felt surreal. Downstairs, the house was already alive with wedding day energy. Patricia moved through the kitchen with military precision, preparing breakfast while simultaneously coordinating with the florist, confirming transportation arrangements, and fielding calls from relatives who were running late or needed directions. "Morning, baby," her mother called out without looking up from her checklist. "You're up early. Nervous about today?" "Just got some work news," Lourdes replied, pouring coffee and marveling at how casually she could deliver information that would normally be headline news. "Our medical I just prevented a heart attack at Stanford. Patient would have died without early detection." Patricia glanced up briefly, her smile automatic but distracted. "That's nice, honey. Make sure you wear that navy dress today. It photographs well and won't clash with the wedding colors. And remember what we talked about, keeping things low-key." The dismissal stung, but not with surprise. Her mother's inability to grasp the significance of what neural dynamics accomplished wasn't malicious. It was simply outside her frame of reference. Patricia understood success in terms of steady jobs, nice clothes, respectful behavior at family functions. Revolutionizing healthcare didn't fit into categories she could easily process or value. Marcus arrived an hour later with the manic energy of a groom on his wedding day, accompanied by his best man, Trevor, and 2 groomsmen Lourdes vaguely remembered from high school. They filled the kitchen with masculine laughter and nervous energy, discussing timeline logistics and making jokes about marriage that walked the line between affectionate and anxious. "Lou!" Marcus grabbed her in a bear hug that lifted her off the ground. "My successful sister, ready to party today?" "Absolutely," she replied, noting how his enthusiasm felt genuine but also performative, as if he were demonstrating his pride in her for the benefit of his friends. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified and excited and ready to marry the most amazing woman in Chicago," he said, his grin infectious despite everything. "I can't believe this is actually happening." Trevor, who Lourdes remembered as the class clown turned insurance salesman, raised his coffee mug in a mock toast to Marcus Ford, who somehow convinced a woman way out of his league to marry him. The laughter that followed felt easy and familiar, reminiscent of the brother she'd grown up with before family dynamics became complicated by success and expectations. For a moment, Lourdes allowed herself to believe that today might be different, that her family's love might finally feel uncomplicated. The morning passed in a blur of preparation rituals. Hair appointments for the women, final tuxedo fittings for the men, endless phone calls about flowers and music, and whether the outdoor ceremony would survive the October weather forecast that promised possible rain by evening. Lourdes found herself assigned to help with gift arrangement at the venue, a task that kept her busy but away from the more intimate pre-wedding moments. She drove her rental car to the Palmer House, following her mother's careful directions to the service entrance where vendors were supposed to deliver supplies. The hotel's event coordinator, a polished woman named Jennifer Walsh, met her in the loading dock area with a clipboard and the efficient smile of someone managing multiple events simultaneously. "You must be Lourdes," Jennifer said, checking something off her list. "I have the gift table set up in the service hallway." The Whitmores were very specific about presentation. Everything needs to be arranged by size and wrapped in coordinating colors. The service hallway felt like the backstage area of a theater, all concrete walls and industrial lighting designed for functionality rather than aesthetics. Lourdes spent 2 hours organizing wedding gifts, noting the expensive wrapping paper and elaborate bows that spoke to the Whitmores' social circle. Crystal from Tiffany, artwork from galleries she recognized, checks in amounts that made her $50,000 contribution seem almost modest by comparison. Around noon, Stephanie arrived for photos with her bridesmaids, transforming the hotel's bridal suite into a cloud of white silk and nervous laughter. Lourdes watched from the doorway as the bride prepared for her big moment, surrounded by women who'd known her since childhood, college friends who understood her references and shared her memories. "Lourdes," Stephanie called out, catching sight of her in the mirror. "Come take a picture with us." The invitation felt genuine, and for a moment, Lourdes relaxed into the role of sister-in-law, smiling as phone cameras captured the moment. But she noticed how the photographer positioned her slightly behind the other women, how the lighting made her disappear into the background of images that would become family keepsakes. "Marcus is so lucky to have you as a sister," Stephanie said as her makeup artist applied final touches. "He talks about how proud he is of your success. Though I have to admit, I don't really understand what artificial intelligence does. Sounds very complicated." "It's really just pattern recognition," Lourdes replied, trying to explain quantum leaps in medical technology in terms that wouldn't overwhelm someone on her wedding day. "We teach computers to see things that humans might miss." "How clever," Catherine Whitmore interjected, appearing beside them with the territorial grace of a mother reclaiming her daughter's attention. "Though I imagine it must be stressful, all that technology, so impersonal compared to traditional businesses where you build relationships with people." The comment felt like a subtle dig at the legitimacy of her work, suggesting that real business involved face-to-face interaction, rather than the abstract world of algorithms and data. Lourdes had heard variations of this criticism before, usually from people who felt threatened by industries they didn't understand. "Actually, our technology is intensely personal," she replied evenly. "Every algorithm we develop is designed to save human lives. We're just using different tools to build those relationships." Catherine's smile tightened almost imperceptibly, the way people's expressions shifted when their casual dismissals were met with competent responses. "Of course, dear. I'm sure it's very meaningful work." The afternoon moved into evening preparation, with the wedding party dispersing to get ready for the 6 o'clock ceremony. Lourdes returned to her parents' house to change into the navy dress her mother had selected, a conservative choice that photographed well and avoided drawing attention. As she applied makeup in her childhood bathroom mirror, Lourdes thought about the morning's call from Stanford, about the man whose life had been saved by technology she'd created. In a few hours, she'd be sitting in a wedding ceremony where her primary role was to smile appropriately and avoid overshadowing the bride and groom with any mention of her actual accomplishments. The disconnect felt sharper than usual, as if success had created a parallel universe where she was simultaneously saving lives and being treated like a potential embarrassment to family harmony. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jasmine. "TechCrunch wants to move the interview to Monday. Also, the NIH called about fast-tracking approval for the cardiac protocol." "You're changing the world, boss." Lourdes stared at the message, then at her reflection in the mirror. She was changing the world, literally. But tonight, she'd be expected to pretend that the most important thing happening was her brother's marriage to a woman whose family viewed her success as suspect and potentially disruptive. For the first time, she wondered if she was done pretending. The Palmer House ballroom had been transformed into something from a fairy tale, all white roses and crystal chandeliers, with enough floral arrangements to stock a small garden center. Lourdes arrived with her parents, her father looking uncomfortable in his rented tuxedo but proud in the way men got when their sons achieved major life milestones. "Look at this place," William Ford whispered to his wife as they entered the elegantly appointed space. "Must have cost more than I make in 2 years." Patricia shushed him with the sharp efficiency of a woman who understood that family reputation could be damaged by inappropriate comments. But Lourdes caught the awe in both their voices. The Whitmores had spared no expense, creating an event that spoke to generational wealth and social expectations that went far beyond simple celebration. The guest list read like a who's who of Chicago's established families. Old money, political connections, business dynasties that had shaped the city for decades. Lourdes recognized faces from newspaper society pages, people whose names appeared on hospital wings and university buildings, whose charitable donations made headlines, and whose social gatherings determined the flow of power in the city. She was directed to her seat by a young man with an earpiece and the polished efficiency of professional event staff. Row 7, slightly off-center, positioned behind a pillar that would partially obstruct her view of the ceremony. The placement felt deliberate, visible enough to avoid obvious insult, but positioned to minimize her presence in photographs and sightlines. Around her, the Whitmore family and their guests filled the premium seating with the casual confidence of people accustomed to the best of everything. Lourdes watched Catherine Whitmore hold court in the front row, her elegant black dress and perfectly styled silver hair marking her as the mother of the bride, the woman whose approval had shaped tonight's guest list and seating arrangements. "Excuse me, are you Lourdes Ford?" A woman in her 40s approached with a genuine smile and the slightly breathless energy of someone trying to network at a social event. "I'm Diana Chen. I work in healthcare administration at Northwestern Memorial. I saw your Forbes article. What you're doing with artificial intelligence in medicine is absolutely revolutionary." The recognition felt like a lifeline in a sea of social indifference. "Thank you," Lourdes replied, grateful for someone who understood the significance of her work. "Are you familiar with predictive diagnostics?" "Familiar. I've been following your company's research for months. The cardiac prediction algorithm could save thousands of lives annually. In fact, we've been hoping to discuss implementation." "Diana," Catherine Whitmore's voice cut across their conversation with the authority of a hostess managing her event. "How lovely to see you. I hope you're finding everything satisfactory." The interruption felt strategic, designed to break up a conversation that might elevate Lourdes' profile among the assembled guests. Diana glanced between the two women, clearly recognizing the social dynamics at play. "Of course, Catherine. Beautiful ceremony. I was just discussing medical technology with Marcus's sister." "How nice," Catherine replied with a smile that could freeze champagne. "Though perhaps we should save business discussions for after the ceremony. This is such a special day for celebrating family." The dismissal was polite, but absolute. Diana nodded with the practiced grace of someone who understood when they were being managed, offering Lourdes an apologetic smile before moving away. Catherine remained for a moment, her presence a clear signal that further networking would not be welcome. The string quartet began the processional, and conversation died as guests turned their attention to the ceremony. Lourdes watched her brother take his position at the altar, handsome in his tuxedo, but clearly nervous, adjusting his bow tie with the unconscious gesture she remembered from childhood whenever he was anxious. When Stephanie appeared at the ballroom's entrance, she looked every inch the perfect bride, radiant in silk and lace, her smile bright enough to power the crystal chandeliers. The dress was clearly designer, probably custom, with beadwork that caught the light as she moved down the aisle on her father's arm. Robert Whitmore looked every inch the proud patriarch, his chest puffed with the satisfaction of a man whose careful social planning was coming to fruition. This wedding wasn't just about his daughter's happiness. It was a public demonstration of the Whitmore family's continued prominence in Chicago society. The ceremony itself was beautiful and traditional, filled with classical music and readings from Shakespeare that spoke to educated tastes and cultural refinement. Pastor Richards, from one of Chicago's most prestigious Methodist churches, delivered remarks about marriage that emphasized commitment, tradition, and the importance of building strong foundations for future generations. "Marriage," he intoned in his practiced voice, "is about bringing two families together, creating new bonds while honoring the values and traditions that have shaped us. Marcus and Stephanie, you represent the best of both your families, and your union will strengthen the community that has nurtured you both." Lourdes found herself thinking about community and belonging, as she watched her brother exchange vows with a woman whose family had made it clear that acceptance came with conditions. Marcus belonged here because he was safe, predictable, someone who wouldn't disrupt established hierarchies or challenge comfortable assumptions. She belonged here only as Marcus's sister, and only as long as she remained small enough not to threaten anyone's comfort. When the ceremony concluded with the traditional kiss and recessional, Lourdes joined the polite applause while mentally preparing herself for the reception. Wedding ceremonies were public performances with limited opportunities for social maneuvering, but receptions were different. Complex social ecosystems where seating arrangements, toast orders, and conversation flow all carried meaning. As guests began moving toward the cocktail hour, Lourdes noticed Jennifer Walsh, the event coordinator, approaching with her clipboard and a slightly apologetic expression. "Ms. Ford, I need to speak with you about dinner seating arrangements." Something in Jennifer's tone set off alarm bells. In Lourdes' experience, when event professionals looked apologetic while discussing logistics, it usually meant someone was about to be disappointed. "Of course," Lourdes replied, following Jennifer toward a quiet corner near the service entrance. "There's been a change to the seating chart," Jennifer began, her professional training warring with obvious discomfort. Mrs. Whitmore requested some adjustments to accommodate family dynamics. The euphemism hung in the air like smoke. Family dynamics was code for social engineering, for managing people who might not fit seamlessly into the evening's carefully orchestrated performance. "What kind of adjustments?" Lourdes asked, though she was beginning to suspect she already knew. Jennifer consulted her clipboard with the focused attention of someone avoiding eye contact. "You've been moved to table 12. It's in the back section, near the service area. Very nice table. Still part of the main reception, just positioned for optimal traffic flow." The words sounded rehearsed, as if Jennifer had practiced delivering disappointing news in ways that minimized confrontation. Lourdes had heard similar euphemisms in boardrooms where investors tried to explain why they were passing on funding opportunities, or in meetings where colleagues justified why her ideas needed more development before implementation. "Table 12? Lourdes repeated slowly. "Who else is seated there?" Jennifer's hesitation told her everything she needed to know before the coordinator opened her mouth. "Some of the younger family members. A few children of family friends. It's a very nice mix of people." Children. She was being seated with children. The realization hit like a physical blow. After funding half the wedding, after flying across the country to celebrate her brother's happiness, after building a company that was literally saving lives, she was being relegated to the kids' table like a 12-year-old cousin who couldn't be trusted with adult conversation. "I see," Lourdes said, her voice remaining steady through years of practice in maintaining professional composure under pressure. "And this change was requested by Mrs. Whitmore specifically?" "The family felt it would be the most comfortable arrangement for everyone involved," Jennifer replied, still avoiding direct eye contact. Sometimes these family situations require delicate management. There it was, the admission that she was a situation requiring management, a problem to be solved rather than a family member to be honored. The casual cruelty of it took her breath away, the deliberate nature of the insult dressed up as logistical necessity. "I understand perfectly," Lourdes said, her tone professional but carrying an edge that made Jennifer glance up sharply. "Thank you for letting me know." As Jennifer hurried away, probably relieved to escape an uncomfortable conversation, Lourdes stood in the corner near the service entrance and felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. The disappointment she'd expected was there, but underneath it was something harder, cleaner, more dangerous. Rage. Not the hot, impulsive anger that led to regrettable decisions, but the cold, calculating fury that came from finally seeing a situation with perfect clarity. They wanted to seat her with children because they saw her as a child, someone to be managed and minimized, whose accomplishments were cute rather than consequential, whose presence was tolerable only as long as it remained peripheral. Her phone buzzed with another message from Jasmine. "Emergency call from NIH. They want to fast-track your cardiac algorithm for national implementation. Could save 50,000 lives annually. Need you to call back ASAP. 50,000 lives annually." While she was being seated at the kids' table because her success made people uncomfortable, the irony was almost beautiful in its completeness. Lourdes looked across the cocktail reception at the assembled guests, Chicago's elite, people whose names carried weight and whose opinions shaped social hierarchies. In a few hours, they would all learn exactly what happened when you tried to diminish someone who had spent years learning how to build empires from nothing. The kids' table was about to become the most important seat in the house. The cocktail hour unfolded like a masterclass in social hierarchy, with guests naturally gravitating toward conversation clusters that reflected Chicago's invisible but rigid power structures. Lourdes moved through the reception with anthropological fascination, watching wealthy families navigate alliances and competitions that had probably been playing out for generations. She found herself observing rather than participating, her anger crystallizing into something far more dangerous than emotional reaction. Years of building a tech company had taught her that the best responses to disrespect weren't immediate. They were strategic, calculated, and designed for maximum impact. Her phone continued buzzing with messages from her professional life, each notification a reminder of the universe she'd temporarily left behind to attend this exercise in family obligation. Dr. Chen from Stanford sent updates on the heart attack patient, whose life neural dynamics had saved. Jasmine forwarded investor inquiries about expanding their platform internationally. The NIH wanted to schedule emergency meetings about fast-tracking approval for nationwide implementation. While she was being treated like a child who couldn't handle adult conversation, her technology was reshaping modern medicine. Lourdes! Marcus appeared beside her with the slightly manic energy of a groom, making sure all his guests were happy. "There you are. Having a good time?" "Absolutely," she replied, studying her brother's face. "Beautiful ceremony." Stephanie looked radiant. "She did, didn't she?" His grin was infectious. Genuine joy, temporarily overriding the complex social dynamics surrounding them. "I still can't believe she said yes. Sometimes I feel like I'm dreaming." For a moment, Lourdes felt the uncomplicated love she'd always had for Marcus. Her big brother who'd taught her to ride a bike, who'd walked her to school when neighborhood kids picked on her for being too smart, who'd celebrated her acceptance to MIT like it was his own achievement. "I'm happy for you," she said, meaning it despite everything else. "You deserve this happiness." "Thanks, Lou. That means everything to me." Marcus glanced around the reception, his expression shifting slightly. "Listen, I know some of the arrangements tonight might feel formal. The Whitmores have their ways of doing things, and with all their family here from out of town." He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable with whatever he was trying to say. Lord realized he knew about the seating arrangement, had probably known all along and chosen not to warn her. "It's fine," she said evenly. "I understand exactly how things work." Something in her tone made Marcus look at her more carefully. But before he could respond, Robert Whitmore appeared with the commanding presence that always seemed to part crowds naturally. "Marcus, my boy, there are some people I want you to meet. Business associates of mine who might have opportunities in municipal infrastructure." Robert's hand landed on Marcus's shoulder with proprietary confidence. Networking never stops, even at weddings. As her brother was led away toward more important conversations, Lord found herself alone again, invisible in the way that successful women often became at social events dominated by male power structures. She used the solitude to continue her anthropological study, noting who talked to whom, which conversations carried real weight, and how information flowed through the room's social ecosystem. Catherine Whitmore held court near the Champagne Fountain, surrounded by women whose jewelry could fund small countries and whose charity board positions shaped cultural institutions. These were the power brokers' wives, women who wielded influence through social connections and philanthropic involvement rather than direct business ownership. "The foundation gala raised over $2 million this year," Catherine was saying to her circle of admirers. "We're planning to expand the children's hospital wing, add state-of-the-art equipment. Real impact, not just throwing money at problems." The irony was exquisite. Here was Catherine discussing healthcare philanthropy, while simultaneously dismissing someone whose technology was revolutionizing medical care. It was easier to write checks for hospital equipment than to acknowledge innovation that challenged their understanding of how progress happened. Jennifer Walsh approached again, this time with a young server carrying a silver tray. "Miss Ford, if you'd like to see your table now, dinner will be served shortly." Lourdes followed them through the main reception area, past tables draped in white linens and topped with elaborate centerpieces that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Table 1 through 8 occupied the prime real estate near the dance floor and head table. Tables 9 through 11 formed a second tier of important, but not essential guests. And then there was table 12, positioned in the back corner near the service entrance, partially hidden behind a decorative screen that blocked the view of both the head table and the dance floor. The table was set for 8, but instead of the fine china and crystal glasses that adorned the other tables, this one featured simpler settings that matched the children's menu requirements. Already seated were Marcus's 13-year-old nephew Tyler, who was absorbed in his phone, Stephanie's 8-year-old cousin Madison, who was coloring in a wedding-themed activity book, and 3 teenagers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else in the world. "Here we are," Jennifer said with forced brightness. "Table 12. Very nice spot, really." Lourdes took her assigned seat between Tyler and Madison, the symbolism not lost on her. The adults had decided she belonged with children, that her presence at grown-up tables might disrupt conversations about important matters, like charity galas and business opportunities. Madison looked up from her coloring book with curious eyes. "Are you Marcus's sister? The one who lives in California?" "I am," Lourdes replied, finding genuine warmth for the 8-year-old that she couldn't muster for the adults who'd arranged this seating chart. "What do you do there?" Madison asked, with the unfiltered curiosity that adults had learned to suppress in favor of social politeness. "I build computer programs that help doctors take better care of sick people," Lourdes explained, simplifying complex algorithms into concepts an 8-year-old could understand. "Like video games for doctors?" "Sort of. More like teaching computers to be really good at noticing when someone might get sick before they even know it themselves." Madison's eyes widened with genuine interest. "That's so cool. Can computers really do that?" "They can now," Lourdes said, feeling a spark of the passion that had driven her through years of 18-hour days and impossible deadlines. "In fact, just this morning, one of my computer programs helped save a man's life in California." Tyler looked up from his phone for the first time. "Seriously? Like actually saved someone's life?" "Actually saved someone's life," Lourdes confirmed. "He would have died at home tonight if we hadn't caught the warning signs." For the next 20 minutes, as dinner was served and the main reception continued without them, Lourdes found herself explaining artificial intelligence to a table of children who listened with rapt attention. Unlike the adults who'd dismissed her work as abstract or unimportant, these kids understood instinctively that saving lives was the coolest possible job in the world. "So you're basically a superhero," Madison declared after Lourdes described how pattern recognition could predict medical emergencies. "But instead of fighting bad guys, you fight diseases." "I suppose that's one way to look at it," Lourdes replied, touched by the child's genuine admiration. "Why aren't you sitting with the important people then?" Tyler asked with the brutal honesty that only teenagers could deliver. "If you're saving lives and stuff, shouldn't you be up there with the fancy tables?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. These children, with their unfiltered perspective, had immediately grasped something that the adults had deliberately ignored, that importance should be measured by impact rather than social comfort. "That's a very good question," Lourdes said slowly, her mind beginning to formulate exactly how she was going to answer it. While the kids' table debated superhero classifications and medical technology, the main reception continued its elaborate performance of wealth and tradition. Lourdes could see the head table through gaps in the decorative screen, watch as Robert Whitmore prepared to give the father of the bride toast that would set the tone for the evening's speeches. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Dr. Amanda Chen at Stanford. "NIH wants emergency conference call Monday morning. Your algorithm is being fast-tracked for FDA approval. This is going to change everything." Lourdes stared at the message, then at the head table, where Robert Whitmore was tapping his champagne glass with a silver spoon, calling for attention to deliver remarks about family, tradition, and the importance of knowing one's place in the social order. She looked at Madison, who was still colored wedding bells while humming happily, completely unaware that she was sitting next to someone whose work was about to revolutionize healthcare for millions of people. Then Lourdes looked at her own phone and began typing a message that would change the trajectory of the evening in ways that no one, especially the Whitmores, could have anticipated. The kids' table was about to become the center of the universe. The message Lourdes typed was simple but devastating. "Jasmine, I need you to conference in Dr. Mitchell from the NIH, Amanda Chen from Stanford, and David Park from TechCrunch. Emergency press briefing in 20 minutes. Life-saving breakthrough, can't wait for social niceties." While Robert Whitmore cleared his throat at the head table, preparing to deliver his carefully crafted remarks about family values and social tradition, Lourdes was orchestrating something that would make his speech seem quaint by comparison. Her phone rang within 3 minutes. "Lourdes, what's the emergency?" Dr. Sarah Mitchell's voice carried the focused urgency of someone who ran the National Institutes of Health's Cardiac Research Division. Jasmine said there's been a breakthrough that can't wait until Monday. There has been, Lourdes replied, stepping away from the kids' table toward a quiet corner near the service entrance. But more importantly, I'm sitting at a family wedding where I've just been relegated to the children's table after funding half the event, while my algorithm is about to save 50,000 lives annually. The silence that followed spoke volumes. Dr. Mitchell understood immediately that this wasn't just about medical technology. It was about respect, recognition, and the cost of being undervalued by people who should know better. "Where are you exactly?" Dr. Mitchell asked carefully. "Chicago, my brother's wedding." The bride's family owns car dealerships and thinks artificial intelligence is a cute hobby for young women who don't understand real business. Lourdes' voice carried the controlled fury of someone who had reached her breaking point. "I'm currently seated between an 8-year-old and a teenager because the adults decided I might disrupt important conversations about charity galas." Madison looked up from her coloring book, clearly intrigued by this mysterious phone call. Tyler had also tuned in, recognizing that something significant was happening at their previously boring table. "Dr. Mitchell," Lourdes continued, her voice gaining strength, "how many cardiac events did you say our algorithm could prevent annually?" "Conservative estimate? 50,000 deaths prevented, another 100,000 major cardiac episodes avoided through early intervention." Dr. Mitchell's response carried the weight of peer-reviewed research and clinical trials. "It's the most significant advancement in preventative cardiology in the past 50 years. And the economic impact? We're looking at approximately $12 billion in healthcare savings annually, not counting the immeasurable value of lives preserved and families kept intact." Madison's eyes had gone wide, her coloring book forgotten. Tyler was recording the conversation on his phone, clearly understanding that he was witnessing something historic. "Dr. Chen, are you on the line?" Lourdes asked. "I'm here." Amanda's voice came through crisp and clear. "Lourdes, I have to ask, is this call happening because someone at that wedding doesn't understand what you've accomplished?" "It's happening because I'm tired of allowing other people's limited understanding to define my worth," Lourdes replied. "David, are you there? TechCrunch is recording." David Park's voice joined the conference call. "And I have to say, this is either the most unconventional press briefing I've ever covered, or the most brilliant piece of performance art about women in tech." "It's both," Lourdes said, looking across the reception where Robert Whitmore was still tapping his champagne glass, trying to call the room to attention for his toast. "Dr. Mitchell, would you mind sharing with Mr. Park exactly what Neural Dynamics has achieved?" What followed was a 10-minute technical discussion that would have been incomprehensible to most wedding guests, but represented the cutting edge of medical innovation. As Dr. Mitchell described breakthrough algorithms and paradigm-shifting diagnostic capabilities, Tyler live-streamed the conversation to his Instagram followers, accidentally creating the first public announcement of technology that would reshape healthcare. "The FDA is fast-tracking approval because the clinical results are unprecedented," Dr. Mitchell explained. "We're not just talking about incremental improvement. This is revolutionary change that will save lives starting next month." "And this technology," David Park interjected, clearly understanding the story's implications, "was developed by someone currently sitting at the kids' table at a family wedding." "The inventor of the most significant medical breakthrough of the decade," Dr. Chen confirmed, "is apparently being treated like a child who can't handle adult conversation." The absurdity was so complete that even the children at table 12 understood the injustice. Madison had stopped pretending to color and was listening with rapt attention. Tyler's live stream had attracted over 1,000 viewers, who were commenting frantically about the contrast between world-changing innovation and social dismissal. "Lord Base," Dr. Mitchell said, her voice carrying a new note of determination, "I'm going to ask you something unprecedented. Would you be willing to accept the Presidential Medal of Innovation at a White House ceremony next month? For contributions to medical science that will save thousands of lives." The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Presidential medals weren't given lightly. They represented the highest civilian honor for scientific achievement, reserved for breakthroughs that fundamentally changed human knowledge. "I'd be honored," Lourdes replied, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what was happening. Tyler's live stream exploded with comments. Madison grabbed her arm with excitement. "You're getting a medal from the president?" "Apparently so," Lourdes said, watching Robert Whitmore finally succeed in calling the reception to attention for his toast. "Ladies and gentlemen," Robert's voice boomed across the ballroom with practiced authority, "if I could have your attention for a few words about family, tradition, and the values that bind us together." The timing was perfect. As Robert began his speech about knowing one's place and respecting social hierarchies, Tyler's live stream was broadcasting to thousands of viewers who were watching a presidential medal recipient being treated like a disruptive child. "David," Lourdes said into her phone, "are you getting all of this?" "Every word," David Park replied, and she could hear his fingers flying across a keyboard. "This story is going live in 10 minutes. Tech visionary receives presidential honor while seated at kids' table at family wedding. It's going to break the internet." "Dr. Chen," Lourdes continued, "would you mind sharing what happened at Stanford this morning?" "Your algorithm saved a construction worker's life," Amanda replied clearly. "Without early detection, he would have died at home tonight. His wife would be a widow, his children would be fatherless. Instead, he's recovering successfully and will be home for Christmas." Madison looked up at Lourdes with something approaching awe. "You saved someone's daddy?" "My computer program did," Lourdes clarified, but Madison was already tugging on her sleeve. "That's the most important thing anyone could do," the 8-year-old declared with absolute conviction. "Saving daddies is more important than anything." Out of the mouths of babes, Robert Whitmore's toast continued, flowing through carefully crafted sentences about tradition, respect, and the importance of maintaining proper social order. He spoke about building bridges between families, while simultaneously demonstrating exactly why some bridges weren't worth building. Tyler held up his phone, showing Lourdes the live viewer count, 15,000 people and climbing. Comments poured in from healthcare professionals, tech industry leaders, and ordinary people who understood that they were witnessing something extraordinary. "Lourdes," Dr. Mitchell said, "I'm looking at social media right now. This story is trending nationally. #KidsStableGenius is already viral. You've created a moment that's going to change how people think about recognizing achievement." "Good," Lourdes replied, feeling a calm satisfaction settle over her like armor. "It's time people understood that respect can't be inherited. It has to be earned. And dismissing someone's accomplishments because they make you uncomfortable says everything about you and nothing about them." Robert Whitmore was building toward his conclusion, raising his champagne glass in a toast that would celebrate tradition and hierarchy, while completely missing the irony that those same values had just been exposed as hollow and outdated. But Lourdes wasn't done yet. Hierarchies, the kids' table was about to teach the adults a lesson they'd never forget. Robert Whitmore's toast was reaching its crescendo, his voice carrying across the ballroom with the practiced authority of a man accustomed to commanding attention and respect. The assembled guests held their champagne glasses aloft, ready to celebrate tradition, family values, and the social order that had served their interests for generations. "To Marcus and Stephanie," Robert declared, his silver hair gleaming under the crystal chandeliers, "may your marriage be built on the solid foundation of mutual respect, shared values, and the wisdom that comes from understanding one's place in the world." At that precise moment, Tyler's live stream reached 50,000 viewers. Madison, who had been listening to the adults' conversation with the focused attention that only 8-year-olds could maintain, suddenly stood up from the kids' table. Her chair scraped against the floor with a sound that cut through Robert's carefully modulated speech. "Excuse me," Madison called out in the clear, piercing voice that only children possessed when they had something important to say. "Excuse me, Mr. Whitmore." The ballroom fell silent. Every head turned toward the back corner where the kids' table sat hidden behind decorative screens. Robert Whitmore's expression shifted from practiced charm to barely concealed irritation as he realized a child was interrupting his moment. "Yes, dear?" he said with forced patience, clearly expecting to handle a minor disruption before returning to his important remarks. Madison stepped forward, still holding her coloring book, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom with perfect clarity. "I think you made a mistake with the seating." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter passed through the adult guests. Catherine Whitmore's face had gone pale, clearly recognizing that something was spiraling out of her control. "Madison, sweetheart," Catherine called out with strained sweetness. "Adults are speaking now. Please sit down." But Madison was 8 years old, and armed with the absolute moral certainty that only children possessed. "But you put the superhero at the kids' table," she continued, completely ignoring the social cues that would have silenced an adult. "The lady who saves people's lives is sitting with us instead of with the important people." Tyler, still live streaming, zoomed his camera toward the head table, capturing Robert and Catherine Whitmore's expressions as they processed what was happening. The viewer count had exploded past 75,000, with comments pouring in faster than anyone could read. "Madison," Robert said, his voice taking on an edge of command, "this is not appropriate dinner conversation for a young lady." "Why not?" Madison shot back with the devastating logic of childhood. "She saved someone's daddy today. She's getting a medal from the president. She builds computers that keep people from dying. That sounds more important than selling cars." The silence that followed was absolute. Every adult in the ballroom understood that they had just witnessed a child effortlessly dismantle the social hierarchies they'd spent their lives carefully maintaining. Lourdes stood slowly from the kids' table, her movement deliberate and graceful. The decorative screens that had hidden her from view no longer seemed like barriers. They seemed like theater curtains that had just opened to reveal the main act. "Madison's right," Lourdes said, her voice carrying clearly across the ballroom without shouting. Years of presenting to skeptical investors and hostile boardrooms had taught her how to command attention through competence rather than volume. "I am getting a Presidential Medal of Innovation next month." She held up her phone, where Dr. Mitchell was still connected to the conference call. "Dr. Mitchell, would you mind explaining to everyone what that medal represents?" Dr. Mitchell's voice filled the silent ballroom through the phone's speaker, her credentials and authority immediately apparent. "The Presidential Medal of Innovation is awarded for scientific breakthroughs that fundamentally change human knowledge and save lives on a massive scale. Ms. Ford's artificial intelligence platform will prevent approximately 50,000 cardiac deaths annually and save the American healthcare system $12 billion per year." The numbers hung in the air like mathematical proof of everything the adults had chosen to ignore. "That's impossible," Robert Whitmore said, his voice carrying the reflexive skepticism of someone whose worldview was being challenged. "If something that significant were true, we would have heard about it through proper channels." Tyler stepped forward, still filming, his teenage confidence making him fearless in ways that surprised even himself. "It's trending nationally right now, Mr. Whitmore. #KidStableGenius has over 1 million interactions. TechCrunch is publishing the story live. Everyone's hearing about it through proper channels, except you." Catherine Whitmore finally found her voice, though it came out sharper than her usual social polish. "This is completely inappropriate. This is Marcus and Stephanie's wedding, not some technology conference." "You're absolutely right," Lourdes agreed, her tone reasonable but carrying steel underneath. "This should be about celebrating love and family. Which makes it even more interesting that you chose to seat the family member who funded half this wedding at the children's table." A collective intake of breath rippled through the assembled guests. The financial revelation changed everything. It wasn't just about social slights anymore, but about basic gratitude and respect. Marcus rose from his seat at the head table, his face cycling through emotions as he processed what was happening. "Lou, You didn't what, Marcus?" Lourdes asked, her voice gentle but unforgiving. "You didn't know that your bride's family decided I belonged with 8-year-olds? You didn't think that might be something I'd want to know about before I flew across the country and wrote a $50,000 check?" The amount hit the gathered guests like a physical blow. In their world, financial contributions commanded respect and recognition. The idea that someone who'd funded half the wedding had been deliberately marginalized violated every social contract they understood. Stephanie, who had remained silent during the escalating confrontation, finally spoke up. "Lourdes, I had no idea about the seating arrangements. Mother handles all the logistics." "Of course she does," Lourdes replied, turning her attention to Catherine Whitmore with the focused intensity of someone who had spent years dismantling corporate hierarchies. Mrs. Whitmore, you've been very concerned about proper placement and social comfort tonight. So let me ask you directly, what exactly made you uncomfortable about seating me with the adults? Catherine's mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to speak. It wasn't personal. We simply felt that the family dynamics required careful management. Family dynamics? Lourdes repeated slowly. Meaning what, specifically? The question hung in the air like a challenge that everyone understood, but no one wanted to answer directly. The livestream comments were exploding with viewers who recognized the coded language for what it was. Dr. Chen's voice came through the phone speaker again, cutting through the tension with clinical precision. For context, Ms. Ford's breakthrough represents the kind of innovation that typically comes from major research universities or pharmaceutical companies with billion-dollar budgets. She achieved it with a team of 12 people working out of a converted warehouse in San Francisco. 12 people, Tyler repeated for his livestream audience, clearly understanding the David versus Goliath implications. She beat every major medical company in the world with 12 people. Madison, who had been watching the adult drama with fascination, suddenly clapped her hands together. See? She really is a superhero. Superheroes always beat the big bad guys with just a few friends. The child's innocent commentary provided a moment of levity that somehow made the situation even more devastating for the Whitmores. They had been outmaneuvered not just by a successful entrepreneur, but by the clarity of an 8-year-old who understood value better than all the adults combined. Robert Whitmore made one final attempt to regain control of the situation. This display is exactly why we felt more traditional seating arrangements would be appropriate. Some people simply don't understand the importance of maintaining decorum at family celebrations. The comment was his biggest mistake yet. Lourdes smiled, not with warmth, but with the cold satisfaction of someone who had just been handed the perfect weapon. You're absolutely right, Mr. Whitmore. Some people don't understand the importance of maintaining decorum. For instance, people who accept $50,000 from a family member and then deliberately humiliate them at their own brother's wedding. She paused, letting the full weight of his hypocrisy settle over the assembled guests. But don't worry, she continued, her voice carrying a promise that made several people shift uncomfortably in their seats. I'm about to teach everyone in this room exactly what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness and success for something you can dismiss at your convenience. The kids' table had become the center of the universe, and Lourdes Ford was just getting started. The ballroom had transformed from an elegant wedding reception into something resembling a courtroom, with Lourdes Ford serving as both prosecutor and judge. Tyler's live stream had reached over 200,000 viewers, with major news outlets beginning to pick up the story in real time. The hashtag #KidStableGenius was trending nationally, but more importantly, it was trending locally among Chicago's business and social elite, who were watching their peers get dismantled by someone they'd dismissed as irrelevant. Lourdes took a step forward, moving away from the kids' table and into the main reception area where she commanded the attention of every person in the room. Her phone was still connected to the conference call with Dr. Mitchell, Dr. Chen, and David Park from TechCrunch, creating an unprecedented fusion of family drama and international news coverage. Since we're all here celebrating family values, Lourdes began, her voice carrying the controlled power of someone who had mastered boardroom presentations, let me share something about real family values. When my mother called 6 months ago and told me Marcus needed help with wedding expenses, I didn't ask questions, I didn't demand recognition or special treatment. I wrote a check for $50,000 because that's what family does. We support each other without conditions. Patricia Ford, who had been sitting in mortified silence since the confrontation began, finally spoke up. Lourdes, honey, maybe we should discuss this privately. No, Mom, Lourdes replied, her tone gentle but firm. We've been discussing things privately for 30 years, and look where it's gotten us. Tonight, we're going to discuss things publicly, so everyone understands exactly what's been happening. She turned back to address the full reception, her presence filling the space in a way that made the crystal chandeliers and elaborate floral arrangements seem like background props in her performance. Mrs. Whitmore, you mentioned being concerned about family dynamics. Let me help you understand what those dynamics actually look like. I'm 31 years old. I built a company from nothing that's now valued at over $100 million. My technology is about to receive FDA approval that will save 50,000 lives annually. The President of the United States is giving me a medal next month for contributions to human knowledge. Each sentence landed like a precision strike, backed by documentation that no one could dispute. And tonight, she continued, your family decided that I belonged at the children's table because my success made you uncomfortable, because you couldn't understand how a young black woman could achieve something that intimidated you. Because it was easier to diminish me than to acknowledge that your understanding of importance might be outdated. Catherine Whitmore's face had gone ashen, but she made one last attempt to maintain control. You're being dramatic. The seating arrangements weren't personal. Everything about tonight was personal. Lourdes cut her off. From the moment you learned I was successful, you've been looking for ways to minimize my presence and my accomplishments. You interrupted conversations when people showed interest in my work. You positioned me where I'd be invisible in photographs. You literally seated me with children because you hoped I'd remain quiet and grateful for being included at all. Tyler held up his phone, showing the explosion of comments flooding his live stream. She's right, he announced to the ballroom. People are posting screenshots of all the medical journals that published her research. She's been on the cover of Forbes, MIT Technology Review, and Nature Medicine. This isn't someone pretending to be important. This is someone who actually is important. Madison, who had started this entire confrontation with her innocent observation, stood up again. I still don't understand why adults would be mean to someone who saves people, she said, with the devastating honesty that only 8-year-olds possessed. My teacher says being mean to people who help others makes you a bad person. The child's moral clarity cut through every adult rationalization and social excuse. In Madison's world, people who saved lives were heroes, and being mean to heroes was obviously wrong. The simplicity of her judgment made every adult defense seem petty and ridiculous. Dr. Mitchell's voice came through the phone speaker again, adding professional weight to the personal drama. I need to clarify something for everyone listening. Ms. Ford's breakthrough isn't just impressive for someone her age or background, it's impressive, period. Harvard Medical School, Johns Hopkins, the Mayo Clinic, every major research institution in the world has been trying to solve the cardiac prediction problem for decades. She's solved it with innovation, determination, and intellectual brilliance that transcends any demographic category. Robert Whitmore, whose carefully constructed social authority had been systematically demolished over the past 20 minutes, made one final desperate attempt to regain control. This is all very interesting, but weddings aren't the appropriate venue for business discussions or political statements. The phrase political statements was his biggest mistake yet. Lourdes smiled with genuine amusement, the expression of someone who had just been handed the perfect closing argument. Political statements? Mr. Whitmore, is it political to expect basic respect from people who've accepted your generosity? Is it political to question why success achieved through intelligence and hard work is treated as less valuable than success inherited through family connections? She paused, letting the implications settle over the room. Or maybe you think it's political when someone refuses to be grateful for deliberately inferior treatment, when someone won't pretend that being hidden away is actually inclusion, when someone won't smile and say thank you for the privilege of funding their own humiliation. The livestream comments had reached a fever pitch, with viewers sharing the story across every social media platform. Major news outlets were beginning to cover the wedding confrontation as a larger story about recognition, respect, and the treatment of successful women in traditional social structures. Marcus finally stood up, his face showing the weight of understanding what had really happened tonight. Lou, I knew about the seating arrangement. Catherine told me it would be better for family harmony, and I didn't push back because I wanted everything to go smoothly. The admission hung in the air like a confession. Marcus, who had accepted her financial support without question, had also accepted her social marginalization without protest. I know, Lourdes replied, her voice carrying sadness rather than anger. That's the most disappointing part of all this. Not that the Whitmores treated me badly. I expected that from the beginning. But that my own brother was willing to let it happen to avoid making waves at his wedding. Stephanie, who had been crying quietly since the confrontation began, finally found her voice. Lourdes, I'm so sorry. I had no idea about any of this. If I had known, What would you have done? Lourdes asked genuinely. Would you have stood up to your parents? Would you have insisted on seating arrangements that honored the person who helped pay for your wedding? Or would you have found reasons why family harmony was more important than basic fairness? The question was rhetorical, but it forced everyone in the room to confront their own complicity in systems that marginalized people whose success didn't fit comfortable categories. David Park's voice came through the phone speaker, adding journalistic context to the personal drama. For our readers who are just joining this story, we're witnessing something unprecedented. A real-time demonstration of how successful women, particularly women of color, are systematically marginalized, even by the people who benefit from their achievements. This isn't just a family dispute. It's a case study in how social hierarchies protect themselves by diminishing threats to their authority. Tyler looked up from his phone with excitement. Oh my God, CNN just picked up the story. They're calling it the wedding speech that broke the internet. You're famous. I was already famous, Lourdes replied with quiet satisfaction. I was famous for saving lives and revolutionizing medicine. Tonight, I'm just famous for refusing to be treated like I wasn't. She looked around the ballroom one final time, taking in the faces of people who had learned more about respect and consequences in the past hour than they had in years of comfortable social privilege. To Marcus and Stephanie, she said, raising the plastic cup she'd been given at the kids' table, I wish you a marriage built on honesty, mutual respect, and the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's inconvenient. And to everyone else, thank you for the lesson in what happens when you confuse someone's kindness with their weakness. She finished the contents of her plastic cup, set it down on the kids' table where Madison was beaming with pride, and walked toward the exit. Tyler followed, still live streaming, while Madison ran to catch up. Are you leaving? Madison asked, grabbing Lourdes' hand. I am, Lourdes replied, squeezing the child's fingers gently. But thank you for standing up for what was right. You're going to grow up to be an amazing woman. As Lourdes Ford walked out of the Palmer House ballroom, she left behind more than just a disrupted wedding reception. She left behind a room full of people forced to confront the difference between inherited privilege and earned respect, between social comfort and actual value, between the way things had always been done and the way things should be done. The kids' table had taught the adults a lesson they'd never forget, that true importance couldn't be seated in the back corner, no matter how hard you tried to hide it. And somewhere in San Francisco, her next cardiac algorithm was already running, saving lives while the people who'd dismissed her finally learned what she'd been worth all along. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.